Dahlia Reyes had cleaned the blue study every morning for 6 years, and she could have told you, without looking, that the silver letter opener on the desk pointed the wrong way. She noticed it the way you notice a word misspelled in your own name. The opener always sat at an angle, blade toward the window, because Mr. Salvati was left-handed and reached for it without looking while he read. Whoever had used it last had set it down straight, parallel to the edge of the blotter, points squared to the wood. Tidy. The way a person arranges a thing they don't actually use. She turned it back the way his hand would want it, and thought no more about it. That was the trouble with being invisible. You saw everything, and no one ever thought to ask what you'd seen. Behind her, in the doorway, 2 of the weekend staff were talking about her, in the particular way people talk about furniture that has wandered into the wrong room. They keep her on because she's cheap. One of them was saying, a young man in a catering jacket who'd been in the house exactly one afternoon. Look at her. You'd think in a house like this they'd want someone who. He made a vague shape in the air, and his friend snorted. Right? Like, presentation. You don't put that in the front rooms. Dahlia did not turn around. She folded the cloth into a clean square and ran it once more along the windowsill where the morning light would have shown a streak if there'd been one, and there wasn't, because there was never a streak where Dahlia had been. She had learned long ago that the moment you let them see it land, you give them the thing they came for. So she let it sit in the air and dissolve, and kept her hands moving, and kept her face still. What the young man did not know, what almost no one in the house knew, because no one had ever found it worth their while to learn, was that Dahlia Reyes carried the entire interior of this mansion inside her head, room by room, object by object, the way some people carry a song. She knew that the 3rd stair from the landing creaked only if you stepped on the left side, and that someone had been favoring the left side late at night this past week. She knew that the humidor in the smoking room had been opened by a person who didn't smoke, because they'd left the lid a degree out of true. She knew the house not as a floor plan, but as a living thing with habits. And she knew it the only way you can ever really know a thing, by touching it every day when no one is watching, for 6 years. She did not yet know that this knowledge was about to be the only thing standing between her and a prison sentence. She gathered her supplies and stepped out of the blue study, and that was when she felt it. Not heard, felt. The specific weight of being watched. Not the careless glance of the catering boy. Something steadier. Something that had been there a while. At the end of the long gallery, near the tall windows, a man stood with his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at her. Marco Salvati did not, as a rule, look at the staff. It was not cruelty. It was that a man with his particular responsibilities had trained himself to see a room the way a hunter sees a tree line, scanning for the one thing that doesn't belong. And the people who kept his house running had long ago become part of the landscape he didn't have to scan. Dahlia knew this about him the way she knew everything else, from the edges, from years of being in rooms he forgot she was in. So the fact that he was looking at her now, directly, with an attention that had no impatience in it and no appetite, only a kind of careful arithmetic, was itself a thing out of place. A letter opener turned the wrong way. She lowered her eyes, the way you were supposed to, and moved toward the service stairs. You turned it back, he said. She stopped. The gallery was long, and the morning was quiet, and his voice carried without seeming to try. Sir? The opener. On my desk. It was straightened this morning. You turned it back at an angle. It was not a question, and there was no accusation in it, and that absence was somehow the most unsettling thing of all. I've been trying to work out, for about a minute now, how you knew which way it goes, since I'm fairly certain I've never told anyone. Dahlia stood very still in the long gallery, supplies balanced against her hip, and understood 2 things at once. The first was that he had been watching the study. That somewhere there was a camera she didn't know about, or a habit of his she hadn't accounted for, and he had seen her notice the one wrong thing in a room full of right ones. The second was harder to name, and it would take her until that evening, when they came for her, to understand it fully. It was that Marco Salvati had just found something about her more interesting than the theft he already knew was coming. The theft not yet discovered, the one whose evidence had already, that very morning, been arranged in a room with the tidy, squared-off precision of a person who did not actually live there. He had watched the whole thing being set in motion. He knew she hadn't done it, and he said nothing about that. He only watched her, with that calm arithmetic, and waited, because he had just decided, in the space of a turned letter opener, that he wanted to see what the invisible woman would do when the house came down on her head. "Will that be all, sir?" Dahlia said. A long pause. Something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. For now. She went down the service stairs. By nightfall, every door in the house would be locked against her, and the only person who knew the truth would be the one who had chosen, deliberately, not to save her. To understand why a woman would spend 6 years making herself invisible in a house full of dangerous men, you have to understand what she was hiding from and what she was hiding. Dahlia had not come to the Salvati estate by accident. 6 years ago, she had been the sister of a man who borrowed from the wrong people and then disappeared, leaving behind a debt and a child. The child was the point. Her nephew, Teo, 8 years old now, lived with Dahlia's mother in a quiet apartment 3 towns over, and every cent Dahlia did not spend on bread went to keeping him there, far from the men who still occasionally called to ask whether his father had been in touch. A maid's wages in a house like this were better than honest wages anywhere else, and they came with a safety she'd learned to value above comfort. No one looked at the help. In a house where powerful men conducted dangerous business, the invisibility the catering boy thought was an insult was, to Dahlia, the whole reason she'd taken the job. You could not be used as leverage if no one remembered you existed. She had built her invisibility the way other women built savings, patiently, on purpose, and told herself for 6 years that it was a wall she could stand behind. She had been good at it. She had made herself so thoroughly part of the furniture that she'd been allowed to drift, over the years, into every room in the house, because no one bothered to bar a door against a woman they didn't see. And that was how she had come, without ever meaning to know the estate better than the man who owned it. It was also how she had come to see the one thing she was never meant to see. It had been 3 weeks ago, in the East Wing, in a room that was supposed to be empty. She'd gone into dust on the wrong morning, off her usual rotation, because the head housekeeper had changed the schedule at the last minute. A small thing, a favor. Take the East rooms today, dear. You're quicker than the others. And she'd opened the door to find 2 men she half recognized standing over a table covered in papers and a steel case, and a third man she recognized completely, because he was family, holding the case open. They had stopped. She had apologized, the way the invisible apologize, eyes down, already backing out. And the family man had smiled at her, a warm, untroubled smile, and said, "No harm done, Dahlia. We're just finishing up." He had used her name. She had been surprised, in the moment, that he knew it. That night, out of the habit that had run her whole life. The same habit that made her note a humidor lid a degree out of true. She had written it all down in the small notebook she kept for the house's wrongnesses. The folded sheets, the drag marks, the table that didn't belong, and the stamp she'd caught on the lid of the steel case in the half-second before a hand closed it. A shipping mark and a long consignment number, copied down without knowing why, because her eyes catalogued things before she decided to. She had filed it with all the other small wrong things and forgotten it. She understood now that walking into that room had been the most dangerous moment of her life, and she'd walked through it without feeling the temperature change. Because 3 weeks later, on the evening of the morning Marco Salvati watched her turn a letter opener, they came for her. It was the head housekeeper who brought them. Mrs. Ivor, who had hired her, who had trained her, who had stood up for her more than once when the other staff complained that the quiet, large woman made them uneasy. Mrs. Ivor came down the service corridor with 2 of Salvati's security men behind her, her face doing something complicated and miserable, and she would not quite meet Dahlia's eyes. "There's been a theft," Mrs. Ivor said, "from the blue study. The gold seal, the old one. It was found this evening. In your locker, Dahlia. Wrapped in one of your cloths." For a moment, Dahlia said nothing. The blue study. She had been in the blue study that morning. She had touched everything in it, the way she touched everything, every day. "I didn't take it," she said. "It was in your locker." "I know it was. I'm telling you, I didn't put it there." She kept her voice level. "Mrs. Ivor, you've known me 6 years. When have I ever? It doesn't matter what I know." And there it was in the older woman's face. Not suspicion, but fear. The particular fear of a person given an instruction she doesn't dare refuse. "It's already decided. I'm sorry. You need to gather your things and go. And Dahlia," her voice dropped, almost too low to hear, "you need to go quietly. Don't make them do anything else." That last part was the part that frightened her, because it told her this was not a misunderstanding to be cleared up. A misunderstanding could be argued. This had a shape to it. The changed schedule 3 weeks ago, the seal in her locker tonight, the rehearsed words, the warning to go quietly. Someone had built this. Someone had taken the most invisible person in the house and made her the most visible thing in it, a thief with a face and a locker and a cloth, precisely so that when the gold seal was needed to disappear, there would already be a guilty woman walking out the gate to carry the blame with her. She had thought her invisibility was a wall she could stand behind. Someone had just turned it into a frame and hung her inside it. Dahlia gathered her few things into a canvas bag. Her hands, she noted with strange detachment, were steady. She thought about Teo and the wages that would stop tonight, and the men who might start calling again the moment she was a person worth noticing. And underneath all of it, in the part of her mind that never stopped cataloguing, one small fact sat quietly and refused to be still. The gold seal had been kept in the blue study. Second drawer of the desk, left side, beneath a tray of correspondence. Mr. Salvati never moved because he never used that drawer. To take it, you would have had to lift the tray, and to put it back the way it always was. To leave the blue study looking, this morning, exactly as undisturbed as it had looked, you would have had to know precisely how that tray sat. The angle of it. The half-inch of overhang on the left where it had warped, years ago, in the damp. The thief had put everything back perfectly, squared, tidy, which meant the thief did not know that the blue study was never tidy. And there were only a handful of people in the world who could have known a thing like that. Dahlia zipped the canvas bag and walked out of the Salvati estate into the cold, and did not cry, and did not look back, because for the first time in 6 years, the invisible woman had a reason to be seen, and she was already, quietly, beginning to plan exactly how she would make them look. He was waiting for her at the bottom of the hill, where the long drive met the public road, in a car worth more than she would earn in a decade. Dahlia saw it from a distance and slowed, canvas bag over her shoulder, the cold working through her coat. The window came down as she drew level, and Marco Salvati looked up at her from the back seat with the same calm arithmetic he'd worn in the gallery a lifetime ago. "Get in," he said. "It's 12 miles to anywhere from here, and it's going to rain. People will wonder why the man I supposedly stole from is giving me a ride. People wonder about a great many things. I've found it rarely requires my participation." He pushed the door open. "I drove down here myself, which I don't do, because I wanted to have a conversation with you before the version of tonight that other people are writing becomes the only one that exists." She got in, partly because of the rain, mostly because he had called her Miss Reyes, and in 6 years no one in that house had called her anything but Dahlia, or nothing at all. The car pulled onto the road. For a while he said nothing, and she did not fill the silence. "The gold seal," he said finally, "is nearly worthless. Old, mine, photographs well in a collection, which has been bothering me all evening. Because if you were going to steal from me, and I don't believe you were, you've had 6 years and the run of every room, and you'd have taken something that mattered. You wouldn't have taken the one piece whose only value is that everyone knows it's mine. That's not a thing a thief steals. That's a thing someone plants. Then why did you let them take me?" It was the question that had been burning in her since the gallery, and she watched it land on him, and watched him not flinch from it. "Because if I'd stopped it, I'd have learned nothing. The people who built this wanted you gone. The moment I protect you, they know I know, and they stop and clean up and try again in 6 months in a way I won't see coming." He turned to look at her. But a frightened woman thrown out the gate in the rain? They think that worked. They get careless. And careless people leave the door open. I needed the door open more than I needed you comfortable. I won't apologize for it. But I also wasn't going to let you walk 12 miles believing no one in that house knew you were innocent. It was, she thought, the coldest kind thing anyone had ever done for her. You keep saying they, she said. You know it wasn't just a theft. I've known for some time that someone in my house is taking things from me that matter a great deal more than a gold seal. Money, roots, names. His jaw tightened. I've known it the way you know there's a leak before you find the water, by the damage, not the source. What I haven't been able to do is see it. Everyone close enough to be doing it is also close enough to know how I look for things. They cover their tracks. They even managed to blind the study camera the morning of the theft, a power fault, supposedly, on that hallway alone. And here Dahlia felt the whole evening turn over and show her its other face. They cover their tracks from you, she said slowly. From the cameras, from the security, from the way a man like you looks at a room. But they don't cover them from me. Because no one covers their tracks from the furniture. Whatever's been happening in your house has been happening in rooms I clean, past objects I dust. They were so careful to hide it from the man who owns the house that it never once occurred to them to hide it from the woman who knows the house. Marco Salvati went very still, and for the first time the calm arithmetic in his face resolved into something sharper. The look of a man who'd brought a flashlight to a dark room and found someone had left a lamp burning all along. 3 weeks ago, she said, the head housekeeper changed my rotation and sent me to dust the east wing on a morning I'm never there. I walked in on 3 men and a steel case. One was family. He smiled and used my name, and I was surprised he knew it. She met his eyes. I think I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, and didn't even know I'd seen it. And I think the gold seal in my locker wasn't about a gold seal at all. It was about getting me out before I dusted the wrong room twice. Rain had started, fine and steady, against the glass. I can find out who took the seal, Marco said. I can make tonight disappear. Your name, the locker, all of it. By tomorrow it will be as if it never happened, and the people who did this will spend the rest of their short lives understanding the scale of their mistake. I'd consider it a fair trade for what you just told me. And there it was. The open door, the offered rescue, the chance to have it all erased by a man with the power to erase things. No, Dahlia said. He raised an eyebrow. He was, she would learn, a man almost never surprised, who did not bother to hide it on the rare occasions he was. If you fix it, then for the rest of my life I'm the maid Marco Salvati decided to forgive. Everyone in that house will smile and step out of my way and believe I did it and got protected. I'll have my job back and never have my name back. And the person who built this walks away clean, free to build it again. She shook her head. You said it yourself. The moment you protect me, they know you know. So don't. Let me be exactly what they think I am. Gone, frightened, finished. And then let me walk back into that house and show every person in it, at the same time, in a way none of them can argue with, exactly what happened in the rooms they thought no one was watching. She held his gaze. I don't want you to clear my name. I want you to give me the room to clear it myself. For a long moment, Marco Salvati looked at the woman who had just turned down the one thing every other person in his life spent their energy trying to extract from him, his protection, and asked instead for something far more dangerous, which was a chance. You understand, he said slowly, that when you walk back into that house, you won't be furniture anymore. You'll be a problem they already tried to solve once, and they'll know the next time has to be permanent. I understand it better than you do, Dahlia said quietly. I'm the one who's been living in the cage. You've just been the one who owned it. She looked out at the rain. There's a boy, 3 towns over. Everything I've done for 6 years, I've done so the wrong people never learn his name. So believe me when I tell you I've thought, very carefully, about what it costs to be seen. She turned back to him. I'm choosing it anyway. On my terms. Those are the only ones I've got left. The car slowed at a crossroads. Marco studied her in the dim light, and something in the arithmetic of his face stopped calculating and settled into a decision. All right, Miss Reyes, he said. Let's give them their careless, and then let's give them you. He did not take her back to the estate. He took her to a narrow house on a quiet street that did not appear, she suspected, on any document with his name on it, and he gave her a key and a room and a rule. You don't go near the estate. As far as that house knows, you're gone, frightened, 12 miles down the road and still running. The moment anyone sees you within a mile of the gate, the careless stops. He set a folder on the table. So we do it from here. You bring the house to me, room by room, out of your head. And we find the thing they don't know you saw, which was how Dalia Reyes came to spend 3 days rebuilding a mansion from memory on the floor of a safe house, and how Marco Salvati came to understand, slowly, that he had been employing a kind of genius for 6 years and paying her to be invisible. She drew the estate not as an architect would, but as she knew it. Not walls and dimensions, but objects and their habits. She narrated the house the way other people narrate a marriage, with a fluency that came from years of paying a kind of attention no one had asked her to pay. When she pulled out the small notebook where she logged the house's wrongnesses, Marco turned it over in his hands for a long moment and said nothing and handed it back. "The room you walked into," he said. "Show me." Not what the men did, what the room looked like, before and after. So she closed her eyes and walked into it again. Before, it was storage. Dust sheets settled on the furniture, undisturbed for months. After, 2 sheets were off, folded, not thrown, and set on a chair. And a table in the center that didn't belong, with drag marks in the dust where the legs had come in. She opened her eyes. From the connecting door, the old service passage. Which runs where? Behind the east wing. Past the wine cellar, to the loading entrance and the garage. She watched him get there a half second before she said it. The garage where cars come and go without passing the main gate. Without passing a single camera that points at a face. Marco sat back. They've been moving things through my own house, along a passage I'd forgotten existed. A muscle worked in his jaw. How long? The drag marks were fresh 3 weeks ago. And the dust sheet was folded wrong. Corners not matching. Not the way staff fold. She said it almost apologetically, because she had learned this was the kind of thing that made people uneasy, the depth of what she noticed. Whoever's using that room isn't staff. They fold like someone who arranges things to look right rather than be right. Squared, Marco said slowly. Tidy. The way the blue study was, the morning of the theft. The way the seal's drawer must have been, after. It's the same hand. They make things neat. They don't understand that a lived-in house is never neat. It's habitual. And habit and neatness leave completely different fingerprints if you've spent 6 years learning to read the difference. Marco was quiet a moment. Then he reached across the table and turned her butcher paper map square to the edge. Then turned it back, off true, the way it had been. Like that, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Like that, she agreed. And something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, the specific click of 2 people discovering they'd been, all along, in the same profession. He read rooms for the one thing that didn't belong. She read them for the one thing that had been moved. They had spent their whole lives doing a version of the same work on opposite sides of a door, and neither had ever had anyone to show it to. It was the most seen she had felt in 6 years, and it frightened her more than the men with the steel case had. I should tell you something, Marco said after a while, and the change in his voice made her look up. So you understand who you're working with, and don't mistake it for something kinder than it is. The family man you saw, the one who used your name. I think I know who he is. And if I'm right, then what you walked into isn't a theft or a careless cousin skimming the accounts. His eyes came up, the calm in them gone very cold. It's someone I love, taking my house apart from the inside, 1 room at a time. And I've spent 3 weeks refusing to believe it, which is exactly how he's gotten away with it for so long. Then we'd better be sure, Dalia said. Because if you move against family on the word of a fired maid, and you're wrong, there's no taking it back. She looked at the long passage running like a vein behind the rooms she'd cleaned for 6 years. And if you're right, he already knows the one person who can read that passage is alive and gone, and exactly the kind of loose-end careful people don't leave lying around. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet apartment 3 towns over, a phone began to ring with a number Dahlia's mother did not recognize and almost did not answer. The call to her mother's apartment had been nothing in the end. A wrong number, a confused voice, a click. But Dahlia had heard about it an hour later, and the hour she'd spent not knowing had rearranged something in her permanently. She moved Teo and her mother that same night, quietly, to a place even Marco didn't choose, because she had decided there were some things she would not hand to anyone, however much she was beginning to trust him. When she came back to the safe house at dawn, she had stopped being frightened. Frightened was a thing that happened to people who still hoped to be left alone. Dahlia was past it now, into the cold, clear country on the other side, where you stop hoping the house will be fair and start, very methodically, taking it apart. "I want to talk to Mrs. Ivor," she told Marco. He liked it considerably less than the letter opener, and said so. Mrs. Ivor was inside the estate, and the moment Dahlia surfaced near it, the careless ended. Not at the estate. She takes the bus to her sister's every Sunday. Gets off 2 stops early for bread at a bakery she likes. She'll be alone on a public street for exactly 1 block. She had this the way she had everything. From years of overhearing a woman's small habits and filing them without meaning to. "I'm not walking into the house. I'm meeting an old friend for bread." She met her on the block with the bakery, in the thin Sunday light, and Mrs. Ivor went white as paper, and then... This was the part Dahlia hadn't expected. Began, quietly, to cry. "You shouldn't be here," Mrs. Ivor whispered. "Dahlia, you have no idea what you're..." "I have some idea." Dahlia kept her voice gentle, because she'd come to understand that gentleness was the only key that would fit this lock. "You changed my rotation 3 weeks ago. You sent me to the East Wing on a morning I'm never there. And 3 weeks later you walked 2 security men to my locker and read me words somebody else wrote for you. You set me up, Mrs. Ivor. What I came to ask is why a woman who stood up for me for 6 years would do it." And Mrs. Ivor, over a paper bag of bread, told her. It came out not as a confession but as a leak. A thing held under pressure too long, finally finding a crack. She had a grandson, 19 and stupid the way 19-year-olds are, and he'd gotten into a debt with people inside the Salvati organization, the kind that doesn't get paid in money. And a man had come to her, a man whose name she was too frightened to even shape, and told her the debt could vanish. All she had to do was a few small, deniable things. Change a schedule. Look the other way. And, when the time came, walk a certain quiet maid down to her locker and say the words on a card. He said no one would be hurt, Mrs. Ivor wept. He said you'd just lose the job. That it was better you than my boy. He made it sound like arithmetic, like there was a sum and you were the smaller number. She pressed the bread to her chest. "I've hated myself every hour since, but I was so afraid, and he knew exactly how afraid, and he used it like a handle." Dahlia stood very still. Because here was the thing. Mrs. Ivor was confessing, and every fact of it was true. The rotation, the locker, the card. A simpler woman, a more vengeful one, would have stopped right here, with the traitor named and the wound explained, and called it solved. It was a complete confession, and a perfectly good villain. It was wrong. Mrs. Ivor, when you sent me to the East Wing, did you know what was in that room? No. God, no. He just told me to change the rotation, send you there at 9. And the gold seal in my locker. Did you take it from the blue study? Did you put it there yourself? No. It was already in the locker when I was told to find it. I opened it, and it was there, wrapped in your cloth. Wrapped in my cloth. Which cloth, Mrs. Ivor? My cloths are kept in the 2nd floor linen press, folded my way, corner to corner, then thirds. Was the seal wrapped in a cloth folded my way? Or folded square? Mrs. Ivor stared. Square. It was folded square. I remember thinking it looked too neat, but I didn't. You didn't fold it. And neither did I. Dahlia straightened, and the whole shape of it turned over and showed her its other face. You changed a schedule and read a card. You opened a locker someone else had already filled. You never went into the blue study. You never lifted the tray over that drawer. You couldn't have planted the seal, because you don't know how that study sits. You're not the one who built this. You're the hand he needed to make it look like staff. Someone else wrote the card. Mrs. Ivor's face crumpled. I don't know who he is, Dahlia. He never gave a name. He only ever had a way of being there, in a room, like he belonged in it more than you did. I know the way, Dahlia said quietly. I've seen the smile. She thought of the East Wing, the folded sheets, the man with the steel case who had used her name and been surprised she had one, the person who belonged in every room more than the people who cleaned it, the person no housekeeper would dare name because to name him was to name the family itself. Go to your sisters, Mrs. Ivor. Buy your bread. And when this is over, and it's going to be over soon, you're going to stand in a room and tell the truth about the card and the schedule. Not to save yourself, but you're going to tell it. Because the man who wrote your card is counting on every frightened person in that house staying frightened. And I've decided to stop being one of them. I'd like company. She walked back through the Sunday morning and called Marco and said the words that turned the whole investigation a final degree. It isn't Mrs. Ivor. She's the hand. He gave her a card and a debt and pointed her at me. The man who built this knew the blue study, knew the tray over the drawer, knew the passage behind the East Wing and how to fold a sheet so it looks right instead of his right. That's not staff, Marco. That's not even security. She closed her eyes. That's someone who grew up walking through those rooms like he owned them, because he expects to. The line was quiet a long moment. Say it, Marco said. His voice had gone somewhere very low. You already know who it is, Dahlia said gently. You've known since the safe house. You've just been hoping, the way I hoped about Mrs. Ivor, that you were wrong about someone you love. His name was Adriano, and he was Marco Salvati's nephew, and Marco had raised him like a son since the boy was 11. Marco told her himself, in a voice stripped of its usual calm. His younger brother had died when Adriano was a child. Marco had taken the boy in, taught him the business and the rooms and the names, walked him through the estate the way a father walks a son through the only world he will ever inherit. Adriano knew how the blue study sat, knew the tray over the drawer, knew the passage behind the East Wing, because Marco himself had shown him, across 20 years, every habit and corner and secret of the house. I taught him to be invisible inside his own family. That the quietest man in the room is the one who's already won. I never once considered he'd use it on me. Why is he doing it? Because he's tired of waiting. I'm not an old man, Dahlia. He could be 50 before this house is his. So he's been bleeding the organization through that East Passage for the better part of a year, building his own version of it somewhere I can't see. He doesn't want to inherit what I built. He wants to make it irrelevant and step over it. A pause. And 3 weeks ago, a maid walked into the one room where the seam of it was showing. He smiled and used her name, and then started building the frame that would walk her out the gate before she understood what she'd seen. He didn't have her killed, because killing a servant draws the kind of attention a careful man avoids, and because he was certain the furniture hadn't understood a thing it saw. He underestimated me. It's the family failing. I very nearly made the same mistake in a gallery 3 weeks ago. The difference is that I turned around and looked. He never will. Right up until the end, he will not be able to make himself believe that the woman who cleaned his uncle's house is the thing that brought him down. That is his only weakness, and it is enormous. That should have been the turning point. But a double crisis is built to take the moment you think you've won and break it across its knee, and Adriano broke it the next morning. On 2 fronts at once, the way a man moves when he's decided careful is over and only permanent will do. The first was the law. By noon, the gold seal was no longer a quiet internal matter. It had become a police report, filed by the estate's own attorney at Adriano's instruction, naming Dahlia Reyes as a thief who had fled and tying her, through a careful trail of fabricated logistics, to a string of other thefts from the estate over the past year. The very thefts Adriano had committed through the East Passage. He had taken his own crimes and stitched them onto her like a coat. If she surfaced now, she wouldn't be a maid arguing about a seal. She'd be a wanted woman walking into the arms of the people looking for her. The second was Teo. It came as a photograph, sent to the phone Marco had given her, from a number that belonged to no one. A picture of a quiet apartment building 3 towns over. Not the one where her mother and Teo had lived, but the new one, the one she had moved them to in secret, the one even Marco hadn't chosen. The message beneath it was a single line. Some loose ends tie themselves off. Come back, and they don't have to. Dahlia looked at the photograph of the building no one was supposed to know about and felt the floor of the world drop away. Because it meant he had found them. The careful, invisible, 6-year fortress she'd built around the one person she loved had been seen through in days by a man who belonged in every room. The thing she had traded her whole life to prevent, the wrong people learning a child's name, had happened, and it had happened because she chose to be seen. For one long, drowning moment, she understood exactly why people stayed invisible, why they took the cage and called it safety. The cost of being seen had just been laid on the table in the only currency she had ever truly feared, and every instinct in her body said the same thing. Disappear again, take the boy, run, and let them keep the house and the name and the lie. And it was Marco, watching her face, who did the thing she would not have asked him to do. I can end this in an hour, he said quietly. I know where Adriano is. I don't need your map or a room full of witnesses to deal with my own nephew. I can have him answered for by tonight, and your boy behind a wall no one will ever get through, and you never have to walk back into that house at all. Say the word, and I make all of it disappear. The report. The threat. Adriano. You take Teo and vanish, and be exactly as invisible as you were, and safe. I'll have lost a nephew and you'll have lost nothing. I want you to hear that I mean it. It was everything. The door thrown wide. A powerful man offering to trade his own blood for her freedom and ask nothing in return. And Dahlia understood, looking at him, that he had finally learned her well enough to offer it properly, and to mean it completely, and then put his hands flat on the table and wait. Because he had also learned, somewhere in 3 days of butcher paper, that the one thing he could not do for her was the only thing that would actually set her free. No, she said. Her voice shook on it, because she was more frightened than she had ever been, and she said it anyway. If you make it disappear, Teo and I run forever. He found us in 3 days, Marco. There is no wall high enough. Not yours, not anyone's, for a child whose name is known by people who don't forget. The only way Teo is safe isn't a higher wall. It's that the man hunting him is finished, publicly, completely, in a way that takes everything from him, including the freedom to ever go looking for a little boy again. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, furious at the tears, steady underneath them. If Adriano just disappears in the night, I'm a Maid, a Mafia boss avenged. The organization whispers, the law keeps my name on a report, and somewhere one of his people decides to finish what he started. The only thing that ends it is the truth. All of it, in the open, undeniable, in front of every person who matters. And the only person who can put that truth in a room is me. Because I'm the only one who can read what he did, she stood. So no, you don't fix it. You don't trade your nephew for my comfort. You give me the room. She looked down at the man who had offered her everything. And you trust the furniture to bring the house down. For a long moment, Marco Salvati was silent. Then he stood, and he did not argue, and he did not reach for the easy thing one more time. And Dahlia understood that this, his refusal to save her when every part of him was built to, was the most a man like him had ever given anyone. Then we do it your way. All of it. In the open. Something moved behind his eyes, cold and final. But understand me, Miss Reyes. When you walk into that house and take my nephew apart with a dust cloth and a memory, I will be standing behind you. Not to save you. To make certain that when he understands he's lost, he doesn't get to do anything about it. That part is mine. Let me have that part. That part, Dahlia said quietly, I'll give you. She chose the blue study. Of all the rooms she could have asked for, she asked for the one where it had started. The room whose gold seal had been planted in her locker. The room Adriano had arranged so tidily that morning without knowing he was signing his name to it. She asked Marco to gather the house there. The senior staff, the family's inner circle, the attorney who had filed the report, and Adriano, who came because not coming would have been the one thing more suspicious than coming. She asked for the detective handling the theft, a careful man named Brandt, who had no idea he was about to watch his own case turn inside out, and she asked that Mrs. Ivor be brought, which Adriano permitted with an indulgent smile. Because what was a weeping housekeeper to a man who had already won? When Dahlia walked into the blue study in her plain coat, the room did exactly what rooms had done her whole life. It looked at her, registered maid, and looked away. Adriano, leaning by the window with the ease of a man in a house he expected to own, did not even bother to track her with his eyes. It was, she thought, the last time he would ever make that mistake. My name is Dahlia Reyes, and for 6 years I cleaned this house. I'm the woman you're all here to call a thief. She set her canvas bag on the desk, the gold seals desk, and did not raise her voice. I'm not going to argue that I'm innocent. Arguing is just two people's words, and in this house mine has never been worth much, so I'm going to do something better. I'm going to show you who actually did it, by reading you this room. Detective Brandt shifted. Miss Reyes, if you have evidence. I am the evidence, detective. Give me 4 minutes. She turned to the desk. The gold seal was kept here. Second drawer, left side, under a tray of correspondence. Mr. Salvati never moves because he never opens that drawer. To take the seal, you have to lift the tray. And to leave this room looking undisturbed afterward, the way it looked the morning everyone says I robbed it, you'd have to put that tray back exactly as it sits. She pulled the drawer open and lifted the tray and held it up for the room to see the underside. This tray warped years ago in a damp winter before half of you worked here. It doesn't sit square. It rides up 1/2 inch on the left over the drawer rail because that's the only way it fits anymore. Anyone who's opened this drawer even once knows you have to set it back crooked or it won't close. She laid it down crooked, the way it had always sat. The morning of the theft, this tray was found sitting perfectly square, centered, flush, tidy, the way you'd put it back if you'd never used this drawer in your life. If you'd only been shown where the seal was kept and reached in once, in a hurry, and squared everything up behind you like a man who arranges things to look right instead of leaving them the way they live. A small silence had begun to gather. The particular silence of people realizing the floor is not where they thought it was. I clean this room every morning. I'd have set that tray back crooked without looking. So whoever squared it, it wasn't me. It was someone who knew the seal was in that drawer but didn't know the drawer. Someone with access, but not habit. Someone who's been given the run of this house. She did not look at Adriano, not yet, but has never once had to clean up after himself in it. This is theater, Adriano said pleasantly, pushing off the window. She's clever, uncle, I'll grant her that. But a crooked tray isn't a name. You can't put a person in a chair over the angle of a drawer. You're right, Dahlia said. One tray is a story, so let me give you the rest of the house. And she walked them through it. The dust sheets in the east wing, folded square instead of corner to corner, the way a tidy man folds and a working maid never does. The drag marks in 3 weeks of dust where a table had been carried in from the old service passage. The passage that ran behind the east wing, past the wine cellar, to the garage, no face camera covered. She named the rooms along that passage in order, the way only a person who had cleaned each of them could, and described what had moved in each, and when, reading 3 weeks of small wrongnesses like a ledger written in dust. The detective began, quietly, to write. Everything that's gone missing from this estate in the past year went out through that passage. Past rooms I clean. I didn't know what I was seeing while I saw it. I only knew the house wasn't sitting the way it should. But I remember all of it. Every sheet, every drag mark, every object that moved an inch and shouldn't have. She touched her temple. That's the thing none of you ever understood about a maid. You don't watch the furniture, so you never noticed the furniture was watching the house. Uncle. Adriano had stopped smiling. You're not seriously letting a dismissed servant stand in your study, and... The east passage, Marco said quietly from the back of the room, is reachable from exactly 4 sets of keys. Mine. The head of securities. The night log shows neither was used. He let it sit. And yours, Adriano. The set I gave you myself when you were 19. because I trusted you with my house. The same morning, the study camera failed on that hallway alone. For the first time, something flickered across Adriano's face that wasn't ease. That's not proof. Keys, dust, a maid's memory. None of it puts my hand on anything. You have a story, Uncle. You don't have me. And this was the moment Dahlia had built the whole room toward. The moment she'd known would come, because men like Adriano always demand the one thing that finishes them. You're right again. Memory isn't proof. A jury can't weigh what's in my head. She reached into the canvas bag. So I didn't ask you here to believe my memory. I asked you here to test it. The morning I walked into the East Wing, there was a steel case on that table, and a man closed it when he saw me. I saw the lid for less than a second. And that night, 3 weeks ago, the way I write down every wrong thing in that house, I copied what was stamped on it. A shipping mark. A consignment number. She set a folded paper on the desk. I wrote it down 3 weeks ago. Before I was fired. Before there was a report. Before I had any reason to invent it. She looked at Brandt. Detective, I'd ask you to hold that and let no one touch it until you've checked it against the manifest of whatever shipment left the garage that week. A frightened maid inventing a lie 3 weeks after the fact can't produce a consignment number she was never supposed to see. Only someone who actually stood in that room and actually read that case could. The room had gone completely silent. Adriano looked at the folded paper and then at the detective reaching for it, and then, finally, fatally, at Dahlia, and for the first time in the entire affair he truly saw her, the way you see a thing the instant before it ends you. Not the furniture, not the maid, the witness. The one camera in the whole house he had never thought to disable, because it had never occurred to him that the woman with the dust cloth had been recording every room he'd ever walked through as if he owned it. You were in the room, he said softly, almost wonderingly. You were cleaning. I'm always cleaning, Dahlia said. That's how I saw everything. And then Adriano did the one thing that finished him in front of a police detective more completely than any paper could. He moved. Toward the door, toward the passage, toward the careful exit a careful man always keeps. A man with nothing to fear does not run from a crooked tray and a folded note. He found the back of the room had filled, at some point in the last 4 minutes, with men who answered to Marco and not to him, and that the quietest man in the study was no longer offering anyone a choice. Dahlia stepped back and let it happen, because it was no longer hers. Marco Salvati did not raise his voice. It was, Dahlia thought, the one thing they truly had in common. For the record, detective, and I'll put my name to all of it, every theft on that report belongs to my nephew. Miss Reyes never took a thing from me in 6 years except, this week, the trouble of finding out the truth myself. He looked at Dahlia and not at the men walking Adriano toward the door. There is exactly one person in this house who saw what was happening when no one else could. You've all been calling her a thief. Her name is Dahlia Reyes, and it's long past time this house learned to say it. The house offered her everything, of course. They always do, once it's expensive not to. Within the week, the report had evaporated, not buried. Marco was careful to tell her, but corrected, the way a true thing replaces a false one, with Detective Brandt's consignment number sitting at the center of it like a stone no one could lift out. Adriano was gone, into the slow machinery that swallows men who steal from both the law and their own blood, and the details of where were not offered to Dahlia, and she did not ask. The estate sent word, through 3 increasingly senior people, that her position was open again. Then that a better position was open. Then that she might name the position herself. She took the last meeting in the blue study, because she had noticed that the people who once looked through her found it difficult, now, to stand in that particular room and meet her eyes. And she had decided she was done making things comfortable for them. She said no. You're offering me my job back because a man with a frightening name stood next to me in a room. Not because you see me. You looked through me for 6 years while I ran half this house from a linen closet, and you'd have signed the paper that sent me to a cell without losing a night's sleep. I'm not coming back to be your loyal, invisible woman with a slightly better title. She gathered her coat. I cleaned this house for 6 years and it never once belonged to me. I'd rather have one room that does. What she built instead was small and entirely hers. She didn't go back to cleaning. She went into the work she'd been doing for free her whole life without a name for it. A small firm that consulted for households and businesses that needed to know whether they were being robbed from the inside and could not afford to ask the people they suspected. She was extraordinary at it because she had spent 6 years learning the one thing no security system teaches: that a building tells you the truth in its habits, and a liar betrays himself the moment he tidies up. Her first hire, to the bafflement of everyone who didn't know the story, was a frightened older housekeeper named Mrs. Ivor, who had stood in a blue study and told the truth about a card and a schedule when telling it cost her everything, and who needed, Dahlia understood, exactly what Dahlia had needed: a door held open by someone who knew the worst and offered the work anyway. Tio and her mother came out of hiding. That was the thing she let herself feel, the night it was finally safe. Not triumph, not vindication, just a boy doing his homework at her kitchen table with the lights on and the curtains open, his name, his own again, known only to people who loved him. She had spent 6 years keeping him invisible. She got to spend the rest of it letting him be seen. It was the only victory that had ever actually mattered. And Marco, she made wait. Not as a game, and not as a punishment, but because she had walked out of one house where a powerful man held the shape of her life, and would not walk into another, however gently offered, until she was certain she walked in as something other than a woman he had once watched be wronged. He didn't push. That was how she knew. A man who had spent his life taking what he wanted, learning, for one person, the discipline of waiting to be chosen. He came to her firm in its 2nd month, on an ordinary evening, and found her at a desk that was hers, in a room with her name on the door, and he did not offer her anything, which was how she knew he had finally understood her completely. "I came to consult," he said. "Professionally. I find I no longer trust my own ability to tell when the people closest to me are lying." Something almost like humor moved under the calm. "I'm told there's a woman who reads houses. The best in the city. I'm hoping she takes difficult clients. She's expensive," Dahlia said. "I have no doubt she's worth it." She looked at him a long moment. The man who had let her be thrown out into the rain because he needed a door left open, and then driven down the hill himself so she wouldn't walk 12 miles believing no one knew the truth. The man who had offered her his own nephew's neck, and then, when she refused it, done the far harder thing and simply stood behind her while she saved herself. He had never once tried to make her smaller so that he could be the one who mattered. In 6 years in that house, he was the only person who had ever turned around and looked. "I don't take clients who think they can't be read," she said. "It makes them careless. But I'll make an exception." She came around the desk, and this time it was Dahlia who closed the distance, deliberately, because she had spent her whole life being approached and dismissed, and had decided the one thing in her life that was going to be on her terms was this: on one condition. "You stop calling me Miss Reyes, and call you what? Seen," she said. "Just seen. That's all I ever wanted from that house. I had to leave it to get it." She almost smiled. Funny. Turns out it was never the house. It was the looking. Outside, the city went on, overlooking the quiet people who kept it running, as it always had, as it always would. But in one small office with a name on the door, the most invisible woman in the Salvati estate sat across from the most dangerous man in the city, as equals, on terms that were finally, completely her own. They'd told her to go quietly. She'd come back and made the whole house listen. So that's Dahlia's story. And here's the part of it I can't stop thinking about. Every single person in that house made the same mistake. The catering boy, the family, the nephew who grew up walking those halls. All of them looked at a woman cleaning a room and decided there was nothing there worth watching. And that decision, repeated 1,000 times by 1,000 careless people, was the exact thing that let her see everything. They made her invisible. And then they did all their worst work right in front of her, because they'd convinced themselves she didn't count. Her invisibility wasn't her weakness. It was the camera they forgot to disable. So here's my question for you. The puzzle one first. The tray over the drawer. The squared-up letter opener. the dust sheets folded wrong. Adriano gave himself away a dozen small ways because he arranged things to look right instead of leaving them the way they live. Which detail do you think gave him away first? The one Dahlia caught before all the others? Tell me in the comments. The people who clean their own homes always seem to spot it fastest, and I love watching them explain why. And then the real question, the one I actually want to know. Have you ever been the invisible one? The person who actually ran the place, who knew where everything was and how everything worked and what would fall apart if you stopped showing up, while someone louder or prettier or born into the right name got the title and the credit and the chair. Did you stay quiet and keep the place running because being invisible felt safer than being a target? I'd really like to hear it. Not the polished version, the real one. Because I think there are a lot more of us holding up the rooms we're not allowed to be seen in than anyone at the top would ever guess. If Dahlia's story reached something in you, if you've ever been the one nobody watched, who saw everything anyway, subscribe and stay with me. There's another quiet, underestimated woman coming next, and she's just as impossible to keep invisible. I'll see you in the next one.